What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Blood on the Razor Wire TV, where we bring it to you real and we bring it to you raw. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, share the video, and make sure you leave a comment. I think today is going to be a very important video. I'm bringing on, in my perspective, one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the country. And I don't mean just in New York, I mean in the whole country. His name is Harlan Protass. He was kind of the architect, along with Judge Gleeson, on the 924C stacking. And I think if it wasn't for him in this case called Holloway, we probably wouldn't be in the position that we are in now. So Harlan, without further ado, can you tell the people who you are, where you're from, and talk a little bit about you?
Good morning. Well, first of all, Chad, thanks for having me on. I'm Harlan Protass. I'm a criminal attorney in New York. I've been at this for 27 years now, although earlier in my career I did do some civil litigation. And I have my own practice, although I've been a partner at a white-collar boutique for 10 years, but I've been on my own now for 5 years, actually 5 years as of this past June 1st. And I do exclusively criminal defense, and I'd say that my practice has evolved over the past several years to include a lot more post-conviction work.
Definitely, if people are looking for a post-conviction attorney in the New York area or anywhere in the country, I guess.
Yeah, the rules are the same everywhere.
You're definitely the guy for them to reach out to, and I'll put up your information in there. You know, I wanted to talk a little bit about something that affected me, affected a lot of people, 924C stacking. I want to talk about the Holloway case. Can you tell the people a little bit about Holloway?
Yeah, so Francois Holloway was a gentleman who was convicted probably at this point 25 years or so ago, and he was convicted of 3 armed carjackings. So he went to trial, he blew trial, and he received essentially an 11-year sentence for the carjackings themselves, actually 12-year sentence for the carjacking themselves, plus 5 for the first 924C, plus another 20 for the second 924C, and plus another 20 for the third 924C, because the second or successive penalty was 20 years, not 25 years at the time that he was convicted. So he received this ultimate sentence of roughly 57 plus years in prison. That sentence was imposed by Judge Gleeson in the Eastern District of New York. And roughly 17 years into service of Holloway's sentence, Holloway had been filing some pro se pleadings, and Judge Gleeson decided that he wanted to make a point with this case. And he issued a couple of opinions in which he encouraged the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York to take a second look at the case and see if there was some way to achieve a more just result. And those 2 orders produced considerable discussion within the U.S. Attorney's Office, but did not result in the ultimate result that the judge wanted, which was the ability to resentence him. So Judge Gleeson, I remember it very clearly, called me one day in the office, and he and I had already spoken over coffee about the Holloway case, and he called me and he says, "I need to appoint someone. Would you take the case?" And, you know, the rule is that when a federal judge calls and asks you to take the case, there's really only one answer, which is yes. And I've said, "Of course, Judge, yes, I'll take the case." So my mission, if you will, was to persuade the government to find a way to reach agreement with me to vacate 2 of Holloway's 3 stacked 924C counts, such that Judge Gleeson could resentence him. And we jumped through many hoops and connected many dots. I doubt a very unique set of circumstances to connect the dots, but ultimately the government agreed to the vacating of these 2 of the 3 924C counts. Holloway came up for resentencing. The judge sentenced him to 19 years, which was, 17 years, which was already in, he'd already served more than that, so it was in effect a time served sentence. And I think that, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I think that one of the, I have certain quote unquote lines that I've developed with the government that some people think are silly, but I think are very persuasive. And when I sat down with the prosecutors, one of the things I told them was, I said, Your job is different than mine. Your job is to achieve justice. When you're getting up in the morning and you're standing in front of the mirror and you're brushing your teeth, you should be thinking, how can I achieve justice today? And I said, in this case, for this defendant, what I'm asking for is the just result. It is the right result. Ultimately, they called me, agreed, and sort of, as they say, the rest is history. We had the resentencing hearing. Holloway was resentenced to what amounted to time served. Unfortunately, he still owed New York State roughly 6 months, so he went into New York State custody, and now he's out. He's working at HVAC job and doing very well.
I want people to understand why the Holloway case is so important. You got a bunch of young kids out here that don't realize, they might be sitting in a drug house, they got a gun, they bust this house. Like in my case, they bust a house. I don't get arrested because I'm not at the house, but they're building a conspiracy case. They bust another house a month later and there's another gun there. And that's when they say, okay, we got them. Now we got 5 years for the first gun, 25 for the second, on top of whatever we're going to give them for the drugs.
Right.
And people don't realize if a person's a threat to public safety, they probably should have arrested me the first time, but they let you go because it's really not at that. A lot of times it's not about the public safety. It's like, we're going to smash this dude. And
right.
there's
they feel they don't have the evidence at that point. I can't speak for what in your case or in any other particular case the government's investigative tactic is, but I imagine that in some cases is exactly as you described. Let's build an overwhelming case where we're going to bury the guy under the courthouse and then we'll arrest him.
Let me ask you this, Harlan, because there's some young guys watching. How many 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids have you seen arrested and end up in prison with 40, 50 years, life sentences? Happens all the time, correct?
Too many. Yes, it happens all the time. Too many. There are too many people who are arrested at a very young age, charged with very serious crimes. But the point is that the mandatory minimums and the guidelines that drive how long the sentence that they receive are outrageous. And the fact that there is no probation and has not existed in the federal system since 1987 provides no goal for them to work towards. If they have a life sentence and they've been sentenced, and I've represented people who've been sentenced and arrested at age 18, 19, 20, and ultimately sentenced several years later to life in prison, that doesn't provide any incentive to rehabilitate themselves or do anything for themselves to improve themselves. So it is a very perilous land in which I work.
When a young kid, he gets arrested, stack 924 Cs, he ends up with 40 years at the age of 24, you're pretty much getting out, in about 35 years if you behave yourself. So 40 years is, there's no parole. There's, the good time is very bleak to, so to speak. So when you get a 40-year sentence, you're going to do a long time in prison, correct?
Yes. Parole, good time credits, RDAP program, you're still going to do a very, very substantial amount of time. You're going to come out a different person. The world is going to look completely different to you. It's going to be like being born again.
And the one thing that I do want to talk about is under the Trump administration, they end up passing the First Step Act. They fixed the 924C, so to speak, where you're not getting the second 25 years, But what they didn't do was they didn't make it retroactive. But the reason why, and I want people to know this, the reason why that stuff made it up there, at least in my opinion, is because of that Holloway case. That really got the talk going. It was Judge Gleeson who, eventually steps down from the bench, becomes, starts working as a lawyer, and he's pushing this 924C project. But really, you guys were the architects. And I remember from Raybrook, New York, writing you a letter and saying, hey, my name's Chad Marks. I need some help. I got stacked 924Cs. And you write me back and you say, you know what? I'm a little busy, but I got someone for you. I'm going to push your stuff to him. And you pushed my stuff to Judge Gleeson. He didn't take my case at the time. He told me, look, go to college. They got college in there. Do some more programs and contact me in a couple years. And that's exactly what I did. And eventually I called you when the First Step Act passed. And I said, hey, do you remember me? You said, I sure do. And I want to help you. You got a hold of Judge Gleeson. Eventually he represents me and I get out of prison on the compassionate release motion.
Right.
But you have also been an architect on compassionate release. How many guys have you gotten out that had life sentences?
I think I have a pretty good record at this point, Chad. I have filed a total of either 9 or 10 compassionate release motions, 3 of which are still pending, so I don't have decisions, but I have wins on 4 of 6. And I think, that's batting average that would get you in the Hall of Fame. Winning 4 out of 6 is very unusual. And I think that one of the cases that, Eric Milan, I found that compassionate release motion before any of us had ever even heard of the word COVID. It was filed before the pandemic. So COVID and health risks were not a part of that motion. It was based exclusively on other extraordinary and compelling reasons.
I'm definitely aware of who Eric is. I had, you invited me to sit on that panel with Judge Preska and 100 lawyers teaching them about compassionate release and, how to work to help people that deserve a second chance. So I'm definitely grateful for that.
If I could add something, Chad, I mean, as I said, I've litigated a lot of these motions. I've written a lot of them. I've read a lot of decisions. And I think that there are some common themes that I've picked up as to what judges are looking for and or more accurately, what turns judges off. Okay. One of the things that judges are looking for is a disciplinary record that is as close to non-existent as possible, or at the very least is historic and does not involve weapons, drugs, alcohol, staff members, and the like. Secondly, they're looking for community support from family, from friends, having a concrete, solid release plan that the judge knows, okay, if I release this person, if I reduce this person's sentence to time served, I feel comfortable that they're not going to reoffend, because that is what every judge is afraid of. And I think that judges are more inclined to grant compassionate release in narcotics cases, recognizing that 20, 30 years ago, the sentences for those were so outrageous. And the kids, and I use the word kids intentionally because the defendants were so young that received these outrageously long sentences. So I think that they're more inclined to have a favorable look at a narcotics case, though it's not exclusively narcotics. I think a lack of a disciplinary record. What have you done for yourself, like you've described, taking college classes and the like? What rehabilitative programming? What is your reputation within the facility? They're trying to get a sense of who you are today, not who you were 25 years ago. That's a different person. I'm a different person than I was 25 years ago. You are as well. Everybody is. Everybody grows up. As Obama said, when I was young and stupid, I was young and stupid. I think that really says that.
I want to touch a little bit on that because there are guys that do have cell phones in prison. They watch the show. They write to me. They ask me about compassionate release. It's not a secret. I wrote that Conrado Cantu case. That was the first compassionate release motion to win in the country. I got out on compassionate release. But there are guys in prison, right? When they walked into a United States penitentiary and, you know this stuff now. And, there's certain things in prison that people do because it is a dangerous environment. You had a client, and I think you're all right with us mentioning Boy George, infamous guy from New York. He's had some trouble in prison, and that affected him on his compassionate release motion, correct?
It did. I mean, the judge denied his compassionate release motion. I was a little disappointed. I was more than a little disappointed. But if you read the decision, you would read, essentially, this is a good argument for compassionate release, and it might be persuasive, but for this disciplinary history. This is a good argument, and it might be persuasive, but for the disciplinary history. And in his case, and I don't want to get into any client confidences, it is not so much what happened on the disciplinary record. It matters when it happened, okay? If you've been in prison for 20 years and your disciplinary record of fights or violence or drugs or whatever is historic, is in your first 5-10 years of imprisonment, judges recognize that reality, or let me say some judges recognize that reality, but they're looking more at Who are you today? What is your disciplinary record in the past 5, 7, 9 years? And in Boy George's case, unfortunately, if you looked at his disciplinary record, it's just consistent violations over the period of time, going up to the past couple of years. And that's what sank his motion. Unfortunate. So I have represented people who have historic disciplinary records, but their more recent record is clean.
You know, we can talk about that because I was in prison. The government responded, probably one of the most vicious responses you've probably ever seen. Judge Gleeson told me, you know, this is the worst response I've ever seen. And I had called you numerous times and you talked me off the ledge. Like, I'm like, Harlan, what am I going to do? You know, this is what they said. And they referred back to my disciplinary record. But I had had a pretty clean disciplinary record for over 10 years.
You did. And I think that that's the point that Judge Gleeson made. To the extent that this happened, it was historic. And I think that the judge saw that in deciding to grant you compassionate release. I'm going to recognize that these things happened, but I'm going to choose to focus my attention on what has Chad Marks done in the past decade, 10 years. That's a long time in which you did all sorts of wonderful stuff, educational, leadership positions within the facility. You know, any disciplinary history violations were small stuff, failing to be late for count, having too many stamps in your cell. Judges don't care about that stuff. They care about drugs, alcohol, and violence.
And you're right, because, you know, even the government said, Chad Marks is doing legal work in prison. And Judge Larimer wrote in the decision, like, I don't really care if he's doing legal work in prison. I care about what is he doing as far as rehabilitation. It doesn't seem like he's been in prison lifting weights and reading comic books for the last 10 years. This is what he's done. And people that are in prison now, let's say, you know, because we spoke about Boy George, let's say now he knows what the judge said. Perhaps he has to put a record together for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years of saying, look, I'm rehabilitating. I'm no longer involved in this. I don't do this stuff. That was the old me. This is the new me, and I'm asking for a second chance to reclaim my life. And perhaps the judge at that point will do that. And there's guys in prison that need to change now. They thought back then, hey, I got life, I'm never getting out. And look, the law changed, and now some guys are in a position saying, you know, for lack of better terms, they're kicking themselves in the ass now.
Yeah, that's exactly the advice that I gave to George. I said, we can go back to Judge Preska in the Southern District of New York. I think she would be sympathetic. If you read the decision, she was sympathetic to a lot of the arguments. But given the grounds upon which she denied the motion, we need to clean up your disciplinary record and then go back to her. And if we clean up your disciplinary history in 3, 5 years, whatever period of time it takes, and we go back to the judge, I bet you there's no guarantees in this world, but I bet you we'd have a win. Because at that point, he will have served 35 years, which is an awfully, awfully long time.
Very sad that, you know, young men make irrationally responsible choices and they end up in prison. You know, myself, you know, like you said, people do change. I was a bad person. I did do some bad stuff. And my judge pretty much said, he used the words. He said, you know, you're a street punk. And you know what? I was a street punk. I was a troublemaker. I thought I was bigger than, you know, other people, that I could get around the police. And eventually it landed me in prison with a 40-year sentence. And then there became a point, Harlan, in my life where I said, you know what? I want to get out of prison someday. And perhaps the law will change. And I don't want to go in front of a parole board because I thought maybe they'd bring back parole and have this big long list of, hey, I'm still a street punk. I wanted to change my life and say, hey, this is who I am. It's not an easy road.
It is not. No one is saying that. And I think that I'll say two other things. I think that is underappreciated by the federal judiciary about how difficult, how high a mountain it is to climb to get through years of incarceration in a high or even a medium or maybe even a low security facility and have a clean disciplinary record. It's extraordinarily difficult because it's not only about you. You can control what you do, but you can't control what other people do. If someone attacks you, you're not going to lie there like a side of beef and take it. You're going to push back. That's a very human reaction. And in the place where you are, it is a reaction that is needed. And I think that is underappreciated by the federal judiciary. Not that they're condoning it, but they're not appreciating how, I hate to use the word necessary it is, or more that it's just a part of the reality You may not like the reality, but you need to accept the reality.
And I know that, you had reached out to me and asked me about that stuff, and I explained to you, this is how I would do it, because these, a maximum security federal prison is a very violent place. And I think sometimes judges don't realize the things that are going on. And I think with the murder of Whitey Bulger, now the public was like, oh my God, they had 3 murders there this year already? Oh, they had 5 murders over here.
The event at Beaumont 2 months ago?
A few months ago, the Mexican Mafia and the MS-13, a couple murders.
Yeah, I don't think that they fully appreciate it, because there are people who have gone through the best of schools and Ivy League law schools, and they worked at a big firm, or they were a prosecutor, and now they're a judge, and they think, why can't I've kept my nose clean my whole life? Why can't these people? Well, because they're in a completely different situation than you, and they're trying. They're trying. It should be more about progress, not perfection. As long as you're making forward progress, you may never achieve perfection, but if there is a record of working towards it, that shows what your true intent is.
Let me ask
and the other thing I just wanted to add, one point I forgot to bring up, is that, and this is a difficult pill to swallow for a lot of people, which is acceptance of responsibility and remorse. If you are going for compassionate release and maintaining your innocence, you're not going to win the motion. Judges want to know that you have accepted responsibility for what it is that you have done, because acceptance of responsibility is a step towards maturity, a step away from criminal conduct. And you may not like it. Again, this is one of those reality situations. That is the reality. And I tell clients that in a very candid fashion, that is the reality. And if you're unwilling to accept responsibility and express remorse, your chances of prevailing on a compassionate release motion drop significantly.
Like yourself, I've won numerous compassionate release motions. I got 3 guys up that had life, but I do have guys that call me and they're like, no, I'm not I'm going to file, man, I can file. And I said, look, buddy, same thing you just said. If you don't accept responsibility, then we're wasting our time. You're paying me, you're wasting your money. If you're not paying me and I'm doing it pro bono, you're wasting my time. You have to do this. You have to accept responsibility. We have to lay out the facts. This is what you've done as far as rehabilitation goes. This is what your crime called for. You've been in prison for 25 years. This is what you plan to do when you get out. And there's steps. And I've learned a lot from you, from some of the stuff that you've sent me to read. And
I use some of that. Communicating with you. I know that how stressful it was for you. So I'm glad I was able to help. One thing, there are, Judge Gleeson has a program sort of internal at his firm. I do some work. I don't really have the capacity as a solo practitioner to do pro bono work. I go for low bono work sometimes, as I call it. But there is another organization that I'll tell you about that's just recently formed. It's called the Miles Away Fund, Miles spelled M-Y-L-E-S. And that was for a guy named Miles Coker. And Miles was a guy I got out of a federal life sentence based on a retroactive guidelines amendment that he didn't know about. And it reduced his sentence from life to 292 months, which he'd already done, and he walked out of Lewisburg the next day. Sadly, Miles died of COVID he was released 5-6 years ago. He died of COVID in April of 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic. And he has these 2 wonderful, wonderful sons. And what they've done is they've established this nonprofit organization called the Miles Away Fund. And the idea is to identify people who meet what they call Miles metrics, like certain criteria, like you clean disciplinary records. If you look on their website, you'll see what they are. And what they hope to do is raise money to hire lawyers on a low bono basis and match them with people who meet the Miles metrics. And it's just getting off the ground. They each have ponied up money on their own to put money where their mouth is. They're going to be holding fundraisers. They're well-connected young men. And so it's something you ought to check out yourself, Chaz. And because they are looking to identify people to potentially represent.
I will definitely check it out, and I will definitely make a donation. That's a promise. Those are great things.
Yeah.
I had a client down there in Florida. She called me and she says, Chad, my husband's got 40 years, stacked 924Cs. I'm a single mother. I'm working at McDonald's, partial welfare. I need help. And I did the case. And unfortunately, before we got a decision, we ended up getting the 11th Circuit decision with Bryant. And, the judge, I don't have to let you out now, because this Bryant case. But hopefully that stuff's going to change. I believe Judge Gleeson was nominated to the Sentencing Commission, correct?
That's correct. Yes, he's been, there have been a number of vacancies on the Sentencing Commission. People don't realize, they think of the Sentencing Commission as just being this vague entity that exists out there, but there's actually commissioners. It's like there are 5 commissioners and they make up the commission. And there have been, I believe, 3 vacancies or 2 vacancies such they couldn't, I think it was 3 vacancies such that they couldn't, they could never get a quorum, so they could never make any changes. So Judge Gleeson has been appointed to the Sentencing Commission. I think he's a terrific, wonderful pick for it, because if there's one thing that he knows, completely, and that he's passionate about, is the guidelines. And he's seen it from all perspectives, as a prosecutor, as a judge, and now as a defense lawyer. What more could you want?
They couldn't have picked, a better guy. Like, I have an enormous amount of respect for him, not just because he helped me get out of prison and he took my case pro bono, but, the Holloway decision, that Kupta case, phenomenal decision. And not that he, I don't want people to think, oh, Judge Gleeson's just sensitive to criminals. No, he's sensitive to what's right. And when they came to my city, him and Marisa Taney and Elizabeth Costello, I seen what real lawyers were. These were lawyers from New York City that walked in prepared. They had binders. They knew everything. They had a binder for the case law. They had a binder for this. They had a binder, and they were on the ball. I mean, the best.
Well prepared. You bring your game day. Yeah.
And, they were definitely prepared. So, before we get ready to go, let me ask you this. Do you think the 851 and the 924C stacking changes in the First Step Act will eventually be made retroactive?
It's a very good question. First of all, let me say, from my personal opinion, they should, because at least with respect to 924C, Congress passed it, the Supreme Court said it should be interpreted this way, and then Congress came back and said, no, boys, you 9 guys, you got it wrong. So the right thing to do would be to make it retroactive. Why it was not made retroactive in the first step remains a mystery to me. Do I think it will? Yes, I do. When? That's the $1 million question. And same with 851 enhancements.
One last question before we go, because I know people probably want to hear this. Did you ever in your mind think that President Donald J. Trump would ever do this criminal justice reform and be the signer of changing the 924C stacking?
In a certain way, no, because of, I've known who Donald Trump is, living in New York a long, long time, so he's not exactly a softie. However, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner's father, went to federal prison for tax fraud in New Jersey. So I think it was really Jared who pushed it. And from a political perspective, Trump saw it as an opportunity to connect with communities that he otherwise was not connecting with. So in certain respects, I'm surprised that he did it, but in other respects, I'm not. Doesn't matter. I'm glad he did.
100%.
Because it was the right thing to do, as you pointed out.
No doubt. Definitely the right thing to do. A lot of people, I got out of prison, Harlan, but there's people that deserve to get out way more than I deserve to get out that are still stuck in there. And I hope that, things change. I hope that we can bring a narrative. I hope that, I can be a part of pushing that. And like I know that, I do everything I can. I've done a lot to try to help push that narrative. The video for Mike Lee. Just, I've done everything that I can, and I'm going to keep pushing.
I do what I can representing my clients. I like to write about it. I've written op-eds in newspapers coast to coast. I used to write regularly for Slate, which is an online political journal. I wrote a op-ed, it's behind me somewhere there, with Doug Berman, who I'm sure you know who Doug is, about crack resentencings, and that's how to get the word out to the man on the street who's sitting there after dinner and reading the paper, is to read an article about an issue like that they had no idea existed. And they might very well be surprised. Wow, you mean you could rob 3 convenience stores in a week? and get what amounts to a life sentence. Wow, you ask your average person, they're like, this person should be punished, but there's no reason they need to die behind bars. I don't think anyone do disagree with that. Any reasonable person, at least.
No doubt. And Doug Berman, very good man. I know he wrote an article about me, and yeah, I know who he is, and definitely a catalyst for criminal justice reform. Very intelligent, great guy. I'm going to get ready to close the show and just let you know, Harlan, man, I appreciate you. I appreciate your perspective. I want these kids to know that are watching the show, not from me, but from one of the best criminal defense lawyers in the country, that when the federal government gets a hold of you, they usually have you and they will send you to prison based off, the decisions that you've made for the rest of your life.
The rest of your life.
And when we talk about justice, sometimes it's really not justice. Sometimes it's people put the screws to people. But, once in a while you get people like Loretta Lynch and she agrees and, they say, okay, I am going to do justice here. And, Judge Gleeson praised her for that and thankful for the Holloway case. But I'm thankful for you for all the things that you've done for me, all the things that you've done for other people.
Thanks to you, Chad. I mean, you're getting the message out through a modern technology, a YouTube channel. And a lot of people can access it and see it and read it, listen to it anywhere they are. So you're doing great work here as well, Chad. You should be, I'll give you a pat on the back through the computer.
Oh, good. Thank you. I'm going to close the show. Tell people, hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe. Share this video, because if you have a son heading down the wrong road, this is probably the video for him. Check it out. With respect, Blood on the Razor Wire TV. Until tomorrow, we're out of here.